Mike Radich here, and I'm now joined on the phone by producer, director, and writer Larry Cohen. Larry, how are you?
I'm fine, and thanks very much for the interview.
Sure, no problem. Thanks for doing it. Larry, today we're going to be talking about the Western TV series that you created in the 1960s called Branded. But before we start talking about the show, let's go back to what happened before it happened. Let's go back to what your career was like before you created Branded. At that point in time, before you had created this show and you came up with the concept and everything, at that point in time, how would you describe your career up until that point?
Well, at that time, I was writing a lot of television. I'd been writing a TV series called The Defenders in New York City. It was the Emmy Award-winning series for about 5 years. Every year it brought home all the prizes. And I wrote about 9 or 10 episodes of that series and other series out of New York, too. And before that, I'd been writing for some live television programs like United States Steel Hour and Kraft Playhouse. So I had quite a nice career going. I was doing quite well. I think I might even have done my first feature, which was Return of the Magnificent Seven with Yul Brynner. So I was cooking, and then I decided I wanted to try my hand at creating my own television series.
You were my age, correct? 23, 24 when you created Branded?
Something like that, in my early 20s, yeah.
At that point in time, there had kind of been a decline in the popularity of Westerns. Some shows, the better-known Western shows, had gone off the air, but still, during that era, when Branded was created, Westerns were still very, very popular. So I'm just curious, were you a big fan of Westerns, like everyone else, during that era?
Well, you know, in that time, there were a tremendous amount of Westerns being produced, both theatrically and on television. I mean, there are no television Westerns on weekly series now, but in those days there must have been like 12 or 14 television Westerns, from Gunsmoke to Rawhide to, so many shows, Wanted Dead or Alive, the one with Steve McQueen, How Gun Will Travel with Richard Boone, Wagon Train, Bonanza. I mean, there were so many Westerns on television. Yeah, they couldn't get out of the way of each other. So, Western was a very good prospect for television. For some reason now, there are very few Western movies made, and almost no Western television shows on a weekly basis.
This might be a weird question because you created it, but are you a fan of Branded? Do you like this show? Because there's a lot of people in your business, whether they're an actor, a director, a writer, producer, whatever their job is, there's a lot of people in your business that they might not like what they've worked on in the past or what they're working on currently. There's a lot of people who, yeah, they might have found success doing whatever that movie was or whatever that TV show was, and they might have made a lot of money off it, but there's a lot of people in the film industry that don't really enjoy what they're working on or don't really like they would never watch it or anything like that. They're not really a fan of what they're making. They just do it because it's their job. Is Branded, is that something that's near and dear to your heart? Are you a fan of this show?
Well, it's at its optimum best, it's dear to my heart. When it was done as I wanted it to be done, and it had some significance, then that was fine. Later on, as the series went on, and I had nothing more to do with it, and other people came in and kind of diluted the whole product down, and it made a kind of a routine television show out of it. Then I wasn't that involved in it anymore or that interested in it anymore. I had a lot of excitement at the very beginning. You do that when you're getting a show on the air. Of course, you're very excited. And sometimes after a while, well, you know what happens is the producers, other people come in who are executives from the network, or the star of the show becomes powerful and wants to exert his will and his point of view, And so, you no longer have the autonomy that you had at the very, very outset of the show, when everyone was really depending on you to get those scripts written so the show could get on the air. It's one thing to sell a show, and then when you get the order to put the show on the air, well, now all of a sudden you're in an emergency situation because they want all the scripts a week ago yesterday. Mm-hmm. So get out there and write them, and nothing can happen until you write the script. They can't cast it, they can't build the sets, they can't schedule it, they can't budget it. Everything relies on the script. So you're in a very powerful position, particularly at the very beginning of a production.
When we think of someone pitching a TV series, we think of them writing it down, going through all the fine details, and coming up with strong characters, and coming up with an interesting summary for the entire series and how everything's going to work out and what we're building up to and how we got to certain points and all kinds of things. Just really digging deep on everything so that when you go to pitch a TV series, you know exactly what you're going to talk about. Now, from what I've heard, that isn't true in your case. When you went to pitch Branded to Harvey Bennett, you just winged it. You went right off the top of your head, the first thing that popped into your mind, you just came up with Branded and you were telling them about this story. This was something that you came up with on the spot, correct? This wasn't something that you had been kicking around for 2 or 3 years trying to shop it somewhere and finally it was able to be sold. This was something that you winged and came up with right off the top of your head, correct?
Yeah, well, that's more or less true. Harvey Bennett was an executive for ABC. Mm-hmm. He really had nothing to do with the actual show getting on the air, but sure. He's the one I first came up with the show and pitched. And then after I finished the meeting, my agent, Peter Savison, said to me, well, wait a minute, we don't have to wait for him. I know a company that's looking for a Western, and they have a spot over at NBC on Sunday nights that Procter & Gamble owns, and P&G has the time period, and Goodson and Todman is the company that is interested in putting something on, and maybe we can put the whole package together. So we ran over to the Goodson Todman people and pitched it to them, and they went for it immediately, and they immediately got Chuck Connors involved, and the next thing you know, Procter & Gamble scheduled the show on Sunday nights at 8:30. That was a fabulous time period. We followed Walt Disney, and we preceded Bonanza, and both those shows were blockbuster shows. But for some reason, Procter & Gamble had not been able to get a successful half-hour show in between those two programs. So we got that shot at that time period. NBC had nothing to do with it because Procter & Gamble could schedule whatever they wanted. In those days, advertising agencies and sponsors controlled certain time periods. That doesn't hold true today, but that's the way it was at that time. So NBC, they try to muscle us to get a percentage ownership in the show, which Goodson Todman wouldn't give them, but the show went on the air anyway.
Do you remember what you said when you were making that original pitch?
Well, I more or less told the story of Brandon, of the court-martialed cavalry officer who was accused of running away and has to prove his manhood and prove his courage and ride through the West trying to live down his reputation. It was really an attempt to do a story about a blacklisted cowboy. At that time, we were still suffering through the plague of blacklisting, where people couldn't get work because of accusations about their past political affiliations, and people couldn't live down their reputation or even the accusation, even if it wasn't true. The mere accusation or innuendo that someone was disloyal was enough to ruin your life and ruin your career, and so I thought, well, how do you tell the story of somebody who's been blacklisted on a television series? You can't do it, except if you turn it into a Western. And now you can basically deal with the same emotional situation of a man trying to prove his innocence and live down his reputation. And so that's what we did. Mm-hmm. And I never told anybody about what the real motivation for the show was. until later on after the show was on the air, and I did mention it to Chuck Connors, which was a big mistake because Chuck was a very conservative, kind of right-wing person. And after that, he never treated me the same. Once he heard that he'd been hoodwinked into playing the part of a blacklisted individual, he was rather upset with me. I think he thought he'd been involved in a communist conspiracy of some kind.
When you sent in your original 6 or 7 page outline for Branded to Goodson and Todman, when you sent that in, did anything change from the original pitch you made to Harvey Bennett? Did you change anything from the original idea you had to that outline?
No, it was the original idea. And by the way, Goodson and Todman were famous for quiz shows. They had produced dozens of quiz shows and become very successful with those programs. As a matter of fact, my mother used to take me to some of their quiz shows when I was a child, because we used to go out for an afternoon, and it was a way of spending a day and not spending any money. We just take the subway downtown and go to see Break the Bank or some other show like that. And sometimes my mother would get on the show as a contestant, win a few prizes. But Goodson and Todman in those days actually were there in person doing the warm-up for the show. And later on they became enormously successful and enormously wealthy. And they had produced a previous Western called The Rebel, which had some degree of success. So they had some history with Westerns. And Nick Adams played in the Rebel. Mm-hmm. And so later on, Branded was something that really fell into place, because it wasn't like they had never done a Western before, although they were most famous for quiz shows.
In your archives at your house, do you still have those pages?
Somewhere in my filing cabinet.
Did you come up with the name Bitter Creek? And if so, does that name have a special meaning?
I just made the name up out of thin air.
The name Jason McCord, where did you come up with that name? Is there some special meaning behind it, or is it just a random name?
I just made the name up, and General Reed and all the other characters that were in the pilot, they were all made up. They didn't have any relevance.
The Broken Saber, is that your creation?
Oh, yes. The Broken Saber was my creation. I thought he needed some kind of unique weapon. Chuck Connors had the rifle in The Rifleman, and I thought he needed something as a symbolic element of his predicament. And I thought the Broken Saber was a very good element. And, of course, when they did a feature version of the Branded series, by stringing several episodes together, they called it Broken Saber.
Why did you decide to make him a surveyor?
Well, I tried to come up with some occupation that he could have in the military, which he could carry on as a civilian. And being a surveyor seemed to be something that would be indicative of opening up of the Wild West, and provide him with some kind of job he could be seeking, even though he was no longer in the Army.
When you came up with the concept for Branded, who did you have in mind to play the main character in the show, Jason McCord? Obviously, he was played by Chuck Connors, but originally, when you had came up with this idea for this show, what actor did you have in mind to play the lead character?
Well, truthfully, the whole thing happened so fast that by the time I pitched it to Harv Bennett, went over to Goodson Todman probably the same day or the next day, and already Chuck Connors' name was mentioned, and of course he was a big star in television, having done The Rifleman for so many years. So the opportunity of getting him was a real break, and I couldn't have thought of anybody better for the part, and so certainly nobody else's name ever came up. As a matter of fact, when Chuck Connors agreed to do the series, it was the talk of the industry, because Chuck Connors was getting $10,000 per half-hour show, and everybody thought that was a phenomenal fee. Imagine getting $10,000 for a half hour. Wow. Today it's a joke. I mean, people getting $1 million for a half hour. So, but that's what he got. And as I say, it made ripples in the television industry.
before Branded, were you a fan of Chuck Connors?
I'd seen him in a number of things, and in a couple of features. He was in a movie called The Big Country with Gregory Peck and Charlton Heston and Gene Simmons, directed by William Wyler, and he actually was quite good in that. He was the villain, and he played the villain in a number of movies rather than the hero. In television, he was a hero. In movies, he was usually a villain. But he was good. He had a good look to him. I thought he was a good performer. And oddly enough, there was someone else who thought so too. And it came as a big surprise to me. Some of the other people who were big fans of Chuck Connors. Too many people to mention, really.
At this point in time, the show's greenlit. It's going to start filming without a pilot. It's going to go right into a series. So I'm interested in knowing, at that point in time, how much say did you have? Like, let's say you weren't a fan of Chuck Connors and you had some actor or somebody else in mind to play the part of Jason McCord. Could you have said, oh no, we're not going with Chuck Connors, we're going with somebody else, or certain other things that are a part of the developmental process of a show? Did you have a lot of say at that point in time?
Well, I would have been very foolish to object. Chuck Connors meant more or less an on-the-air commitment from Procter & Gamble.
Okay.
We were going to be on the air with, and it was unheard of to be able to sell a television series without a pilot being shot. I mean, to be able to get a pilot being made was already a miracle with the competition. But to get a show on the air without shooting a pilot, only based on 6 pages that I'd written, and get it on the air immediately. We went into production almost instantly. I mean, it was a phenomenal event. And for me to open my mouth and start objecting to Chuck Connors, I couldn't think of anybody better for the part, frankly. I mean, so why would I start trouble? I mean, I was just swept along by the excitement that everything was just falling into place.
From when you came up with the idea to the first day of filming, how much time are we talking about? You said a couple times now that it was a quick process. How much time from when you came up with the idea to the first day of filming?
Well, the first thing we shot was the opening sequence of the court-martial, which was shot up in Kanab, Utah. And they wanted to go up there because there was a fort that they could use, and they could actually avoid having to pay union extras in the Los Angeles area, since there was going to be a formation of cavalry, young cavalrymen, and they would be used every week in the show. So if they had shot it back in L.A., they probably would have had to pay a royalty to all those extras who were standing there in formation. By going up to Kanab, Utah, they avoided the jurisdiction, and they could make it cheaply. And so we flew up to Kanab, Utah. I went up with Dominic Fronteri, who was the composer, who wrote the song based on my suggestion that we have a song at the beginning. I thought that was good because High Noon had kind of introduced the idea of having a song, introducing a Western movie and a Western story. So I thought, in keeping with High Noon, we would have a song about Branded that would more or less lay out the whole backstory of Jason McCord. So I suggested everything that was in the song, and Dominic Fronteri picked it up, and Alan Walsh was his partner. And I really should have participated in the ownership of the song as well, because I gave it to them, but I wasn't smart enough, and I didn't have a good enough lawyer to do it. But probably there's more money been made on the song than on the series. As a matter of fact, Jeff Bridges and John Goodman sing that song in the movie The Great Lebowski. They actually sing the Branded song. And then, as part of the story in The Great Lebowski, they decide to go visit the creator of the Branded series and the guy who wrote most of the early episodes. And they go to his house. And, of course, it's fictionalized. It's not me. But they go to the home of the guy who created Branded. And this is in the movie. And they find him in an iron lung, and he's dying. and there's a whole routine going on there when they finally locate the guy who created Branded and find him on his deathbed. And I thought, well, the Coen brothers, who I'd met before, and were kind of considered friends. They probably put that in the movie and put it on there kind of as a joke on me. Mm-hmm. But at any rate, it's immortalized the Branded song and immortalized the series somewhat because The Great Lebowski is a cult film. And you'd be surprised at the number of people who remember that song.
Oh, it's a great song.
And then there was a parody of it that the kids all sang in school.
Yeah.
It was called Stranded.
Yeah.
And it was a rather obscene song. But the kids all sang it, and it got around the country, and people were singing it all over the damn country. And it was just, kind of insulting in a way, but also a compliment in a way that it had caught on to such a degree.
Did you come up with the lyrics?
Yeah, I came up with almost all the lyrics in the song. Now, with all due respect, they wrote the music, and they adjusted the lyrics and put them together so that they fit in with the music. But everything in the lyric comes from me.
You're a genius. This is great stuff. No, you are a genius. This is great stuff.
That Branded makes you a genius.
Yeah, it does. And then you also did one of my favorite movies you were a part of, Cellular. I love that movie.
Oh, Cellular. Well, Phone Booth and Cellular were two of my shining motion pictures of recent years. But by the way, the name of the director who was most a fan of Branded, believe it or not, was Frank Capra.
Really?
Frank Capra had seen Chuck Connors in that movie that William Wyler made called The Big Country, and he'd become a fan of Chuck Connors. He thought Chuck Connors was a very good cinema actor. And so he started watching the series, and he became a huge fan of the Branded series. And in addition to that, he became a fan of my movies that I wrote and directed. And he went and saw most of my movies. And a few years ago, I got a letter from a gentleman who had lived next door to Frank Capra down in Palm Springs. And he said that he and Frank Capra used to go to the movies together. And Frank always went to see one of my movies. And he wanted me to know how a big a fan Frank Capra was of mine. And he wanted to write me this letter. I couldn't believe it. Of all people, Frank Capra, I would have died to have met him. And then I remembered that when I was doing Branded, one day I went in the office, and one of the secretaries told me that I'd gotten a phone call from Frank Capra. And I thought it was so absurd that I just blew it off. I didn't pay any attention to it. I thought, oh, somebody's playing a joke on me. Frank Capra calling me, Academy Award-winning director of, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and it happened one night, and It's a Wonderful Life. Come on, what would he be calling me about? I never followed up on the call, and as it turned out, it was Frank Capra. What a mistake that was. What a thrill it would have been to have met him. But and 30-some years later, 40 years later, I get a letter from his next-door neighbor, an old man, telling me that he wanted me to know this, and I've got the letters still in my files, and it was too late. Frank Capra was no longer with us, but it was an experience.
But he called you up because you're a genius.
I don't know why he called me up. I don't know about my being a genius.
No, that's what it is. That's what I'm sticking with.
He was a genius, that's for sure. Frank was a genius, and a real unequivocal genius. He made some of the greatest movies of all time. And I don't know why he was so crazy about Chuck Connors. Frankly, I think Chuck Connors was good, but I'm surprised that he was so particularly enamored with Chuck Connors.
During your time working on the show, how much control did you have over the course of you working on it? And did you stick around for the entire duration of the show? Because I've noticed, some of your credits during that time, you were working on a lot of stuff as Branded was going on. So did you stick around for the entire time? And during your time on the show, how much control did you have?
On the beginning of the show, I had a lot of control, almost absolute control of the material. But after I told Chuck Connors about the blacklisted cowboy element, that ended. All of a sudden, I was persona non grata. So next thing I know, Chuck had brought some other writers in, and there were other people were contributing material and writing scripts, and I wasn't in charge anymore. And when that happened, I decided I was just going to bow out. I wasn't going to go into work every day and get into fights with people and conflicts with people. I'd like to have a comfortable, orderly life without a lot of conflict. I like to do my work and write my scripts, and I do it alone. I don't have a bunch of co-writers or staff. Today, almost all the television shows are written by a team, a room full of writers. Usually they're credited as co-producers, executive producers, associate producers. You'll see it on all the television shows, the number of producing credits that come up. Sometimes there's 6, 7, 8 of them, and that means that all those people are in the writing room, and they all write the show together. So one person writes a draft, they turn it over to somebody else, they turn it over to somebody else, then it gets turned over to someone else, and then finally the head writer takes it and runs it through his computer. And that's the way it's done, but that's not the way I did it. When I was doing it, I wrote the entire show from the last word to the first word. And pretty soon, when Chuck and I had this falling out, well, that was the end of my autonomy over there. And if I couldn't run the show, I didn't want to be there at all. So I just bowed out very gradually. I did it in such a way that I'd maintain my fees, and that wouldn't violate my contract. But they were just as happy to see me go because Chuck wasn't happy with me anymore. And Chuck was the star, and Chuck was running the show. And I remember one day I came to the Western Street at Paramount where we shot, and this was a great big long Western Street that was used on Bonanza as well. And there at the end of the street was Chuck Connors on his horse that he rode in the series. And he saw me at the far end, and he turned the horse, and he started galloping towards me. And I was standing in the middle of the street. It was like something out of a classic Western. And there I am standing there, and here comes the horse with Chuck Connors riding on it. And, you know, he was a big guy, and the horse was a big horse. And they came barreling down the center of that street straight at me. And for some reason, I didn't move. I just stayed in position and just stared at him. And he rode all the way up to me and reined up so close to me I could feel the horse's breath on my face. And he said to me, "I thought you were going to run." And I looked at him, and I just looked at him and smiled. And he that was just about the same time that I understood that our relationship was over, and that I was no longer wanted around there. So now, years later, now we're talking about 15 years later, they had a party at the old studio. It used to be Republic. It was called CBS Studio Center, but it was formerly Republic Studios in the Valley, and they had it was on the Western Street, and they had all the old Western stars that were still around invited to this event. And Gene Autry was there, and Pat Buttram, and a lot of other Western stars, and I'd been invited, and they seated me at the table with Chuck Connors. And I hadn't seen him in years. And he turned to me and he said, "You know, I'll never forget the day I tried to ride you down on that Western Street at Paramount and you didn't run." And I thought a lot of you after that. I couldn't believe it, that after all those years he brought that up. And he still remembered it. And he still remembered that he did it deliberately. And I just laughed at it and made a joke out of it and everything. And then I saw Chuck for the last time one afternoon at lunch at the Magic Castle in Hollywood. He was there. He was very friendly that day. He was friendly because he'd done a few other television series that had gone off the air, and he was looking for a job. It was a whole different story. It was a whole different Chuck Connors. He was trying to be very ingratiating, and I was very pleasant with him, and that was the last time I saw him.
Tell me the story about how you helped Chuck Connors take his boots off after filming the opening.
Oh, where'd you hear that story?
I have my sources.
Well, that's when we were up in Kanab, Utah, when we were all getting along fine at the beginning. That's when we were shooting the court-martial scene, and there was only one motel up there, and it was such a second-rate hotel that there weren't even any telephones in the rooms. Only one or two rooms had a phone, and so it wasn't much of a hotel. But I would gone to bed, And then there was a knock on my door, and I opened the door, and it was Chuck Connor standing there. He's in his undershirt. He had his cavalry pants on and his boots. And he said, I'm in trouble. Everybody's gone to bed, and I can't get my boots off. He had these boots that went up to his knees. So I said, what do you want me to do about it? He said, come back to my room and help me take my boots off. And you can use my phone and call your wife if you want to. So I went back to the room, and I was going to help him take his boots off. And I thought to myself, oh, God, I hope there isn't anything else going on here, because I just got my first television series. We're shooting the first day, and already I'm going back to this guy's room in the middle of the night to take his boots off. I said, God knows what's going to happen, and this guy is also like 6'4". What am I going to do? So I went back there, and I was going to pull his boot. He said, no, that's not how you do it. You turn around, and I put my foot between your legs, and then I push on your ass with my other foot, and you pull, and that's how I get the boots off. I'm thinking, this doesn't seem right to me, but what can I do about it? So I grab his leg, and I put it between my legs, and I'm pulling on the boots, and I'm pulling on the boots, and I'm pulling, and the next thing you know, he comes flying off the chair behind me, falls down on the floor, and bangs his head on the coffee table. Now he's lying there, stunned on the floor, and I'm looking at him. This great big guy is sprawled out, and I'm saying to myself, I got a series on the air, and I've killed my star. What am I going to do now? Anyway, he finally recovered, and he started to get up. And I said, boy, this story is going to look great in TV Guide. Well, he gave me a look like he thought I was serious about it, But at any rate, I managed to get his other boot off, and he let me call my wife, and I went back to my room, and that was the end of it. But it was a memorable moment looking down at Chuck Connors, lying there stunned on the floor, thinking, I wonder if I've done irreparable damage and fucked up the entire, pardon my language, and screwed up the entire pilot and the entire first episode of the show. Anyway, it was just an experience. I'll never forget that one. Wherever you heard about it.
That's a great story. I love hearing that story. One thing I've always wanted to ask you...
Didn't have much of a sense of humor about it, I'll tell you.
One thing I've always wanted to ask you is, why did he pick you out of all the people? Were you guys like the last two that were up there, and you were the only guy he knew? Like, why did he pick you for the guy to take his boots off? Where did that come from?
No, he claimed everybody else was asleep.
Oh, that's funny. That's a great story. Love that story. Do you have any other stories like that? Whether it was with Chuck Connors, I know you mentioned the story on the horse, and now this boot story. Any other stories like that, whether it was with him or someone else?
Not really. I mean, when we went up to Kanab, Utah, I flew up there with Dominic Frontieri, and he said he was flying up in a plane, and would I like to go with him? So I said, yeah, sure. I mean, I'd rather go up in a private plane than on regular public transport. And we got flying up there, and then he started flying around the landing strip, which it turned out there was no actual airport. It was just a big field with a sock on a pole, and the sock was torn, and there was a couple of records of planes by the side of the landing strip where planes had crashed. And here he is circling around, and finally he said to me, well, I've never flown this plane before. I have my own plane, but it's being repaired, so they gave me this one, and I've never actually flown this type of plane before. And I'm saying, oh, brother, first of all, I'm going to get killed on my first television series. And but fortunately, he landed. But I didn't go back with him. I went back on a regular scheduled flight.
We've kind of talked around the opening of this show, and it's a great opening for this show. It's an amazing scene. I really love it. Sometimes, I gotta tell you, on a lot of shows, whether it's an action show, a western, a sitcom, a drama, some kind of show that's on right now, and I DVR it or something, usually I'm blowing through the intro. I don't need to see it. Once I see it once or twice, I'm out. I don't watch it anymore. I can just blow right through it, fast forward, get right to the show. But this show, Branded, I gotta watch the intro every time. I've seen it like 150 times, but every time it's on, I gotta see it. I just watch it all the time. I really, really love the song at the beginning and also the actual acting that's in this intro. It's a very, very well done intro. One of the better intros in the history of a Western for sure, but also in TV. This intro is very well done. I really like it a lot. So, what do you remember about filming the intro to Branded?
Well, I will tell you this. The gentleman who plays the part of the captain who court-martials Chuck Connors in the beginning of every episode is actually John Howard.
Yeah.
And John Howard was actually a very, very well-known motion picture actor. And he actually starred in a good many movies. He played Bulldog Drummond in a whole series of Bulldog Drummond features. And he played the lead, and his supporting actor who played opposite him was John Barrymore, the original John Barrymore. And John Howard also played Katharine Hepburn's fiancé in The Philadelphia Story with Jimmy Stewart and Cary Grant. And he also played in Lost Horizon, which was a Frank Capra movie that starred Ronald Coleman. And it was a very, very famous movie about Shangri-La. And he played in that. It was James Hilton's famous book, Lost Horizon. And it was a huge picture. And John Howard played the brother of Ronald Coleman, who turns out to be kind of a villainous character in the movie. And so, I mean, he was a well-known star, and I'm sure he got a nice chunk of change for playing this role because it was used in every episode, so they probably gave him a buyout. I'm sure he was paid a nice hunk for that one day's work. And but in the Branded series, we did use a great number of veteran actors as stars of old movies throughout the series, whether it was Pat O'Brien or John Ireland or Rod Cameron. I mean, there was the series was just full of old movie names that were brought back for the Joan Leslie did one. I mean, there was just a great lineup of old motion picture stars. And General Reed was played by John Lytell, who played in almost every big Warner Brothers picture. John Lytell had a very large featured role, and he played Henry Aldridge's father in the Henry Aldridge television motion picture series. So John Lytell was I was a big fan of his, and I was delighted to see that he was in the pilot. It wasn't a pilot, actually. It was just the very first episode. As I told you, there really was no pilot. The show was given an on-the-air commitment, and we went right on the air with the show without having to shoot a sample episode. Now, after that, I sold a Coronet Blue to CBS without a pilot. That was shot and sold without a pilot and went on the air immediately. That was produced by Herbert Brodkin in New York. And then I sold The Invaders to ABC without a pilot. That show was on the schedule before anything was shot. They did shoot a first episode, but by that time the show had already been put on the schedule even before it was filmed. And that was done by Quinn Martin's company. And so I sold 3 shows in rapid succession, every one of them without a pilot, which made me probably one of the hottest TV writers in Hollywood at the time. We came up with the format. They made a commitment, and they put it on the air immediately. They didn't wait until the following year. They just put it right in. As I told you, Procter & Gamble owned the time period, and they weren't satisfied with whatever they had in there before, and they weren't getting the ratings they thought they deserved because they were following Disney and preceding Bonanza, and those were 2 of the hottest shows on television. So they put us right on there, and sure enough, we were on against Ed Sullivan on CBS and the FBI, which Quinn Martin was producing with Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., which was on ABC. And even against those 2 opponents, we beat them. We were in the top 10 every week. Every week that I stayed on the show, the series was in the top 10. After I left the show, the ratings started to descend. Mm-hmm. But while I was still there, the show was in the top 10 every week.
How long did it take to film a single episode of the show? I keep hearing 3 days. I hear 1 day on location, whether it's at Thousand Oaks or Vasquez Rocks, and then 1 day on the lot, and then 1 day for interiors. Is that about right? 3 days to film a single episode?
In those days, I think that was about what every television show got.
Okay.
It's very hard to believe that they would able to turn out a 30-minute television show, a dramatic show, for the kind of money they had to put it on the air and to shoot it that quickly. I mean, there are no 30-minute dramatic television shows on television today, either in networks or even on cable. I mean, now there may be a couple of shows on HBO, like that are basically comedies that are made in half-hour format, but there are no dramatic programs in the half-hour format whatsoever anywhere on television, and there used to be dozens on the whether it was Peter Gunn, a private detective show that Blake Edwards did, or all the different westerns, all the different private eye shows. I mean, it was a holdover from radio, where most of the radio dramas were 30 minutes in length. So when television came along, they started doing suspense and danger and other Man Against Crime, Martin Caine, Private Eye. These were all 30-minute dramatic programs, usually live shows, and they became later on tape. But and then came the shows that I did, which were Branded was a 30-minute show. Blue Light was a 30-minute show that I did at 20th Century Fox, which was a World War II spy show, which was amazing to me that they could afford to do all that costume stuff with the old cars and the Germans and the Nazi, insignias and uniforms and vehicles and planes and everything that they had to do to create the World War II look. All that in a 30-minute format. It just amazes me because today no one would even dream of doing these shows in a 30-minute form.
How many episodes did you write of the show? Because I know in every episode you're credited, but sometimes there's guys who are credited for writing the show. So how many of the episodes, start to finish, did you write?
Oh, I don't know. I'd say a dozen, maybe 15.
And you mentioned that there was a point in time where you were persona non grata and you didn't go regularly like you had once gone when the show first took off. At what point during the show did you stop coming around as regularly as you used to? Was that after the first season? Was that midway through the second season? What time period?
No, it was towards the end of the first season.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, real early.
Yeah, I realized that Chuck didn't want me there, and that other writers were coming in, and they weren't telling me what was going on, and scripts were being written without being run past me, and so I said, listen, I'm not going to go in there and get into arguments and conflicts with people. I have too much else to do, and frankly, I'm making too much money elsewhere, and I'm just not bothering with it. I'm moving on, that's it. And the next thing I knew, I had sold a couple of other series, so what did I want to bother with that anymore for? All my career I felt that fighting with people and struggling with people and trying to convince people is a futile effort, and it takes too much out of you. So pretty soon, after doing a couple of television shows, I decided I was going to produce and direct and write my own movies. And then I made 20 of my own movies, which I controlled completely. I was the writer of them, and I directed, and I also edited, and hired the composer, and I was in control of every facet of the 20 movies that I did. So I was a happy camper that way. And I didn't have to deal with anybody. I didn't have to argue with anybody. I didn't have to discuss anything. I just went and did everything my own way.
the opening of the show was filmed in color, even though during the first season it appeared in black and white. The intro to the show was filmed in color so that if ever they decided to change over to color, they could do that no problem, and they would never have to refilm that intro. So my question to you is, why didn't they just make the entire first season color if they went to the trouble to make an intro to the show that the first season it's going to appear black and white? Why would they go and film it in color if they were just going to have it be black and white and then for the next season change over to color? Why wouldn't they just do the first season in color? I know there were, I want to say, 3 episodes of the first season that were done in color. I'm pretty sure, don't quote me, I'm pretty sure there's 3 episodes in the first season shot in color. So why was the first season in black and white?
First episode, and we shot the intro that was going to be used in every at the beginning of every episode, along with the song. That they decided to shoot it in color because it was the handwriting was on the wall. The television was going to convert to color, and NBC was the pioneer for color television because NBC had invented the color television system that was going to be used. CBS had invented a different color system that created a lot of technical problems, and they didn't get the FCC to okay the CBS version of color television. And so the NBC color was going to be the color that was used, and the show was going to be aired on NBC, so it was pretty clear to us that we were going to be in color. I mean, I think Disney was in color, and I think Bonanza was in color. And I know also Dinah Shore was in color. And these were all shows that were on NBC on Sunday nights. So I think it was inevitable that we were going to end up in color, which was a very smart move to shoot it in color. Didn't cost that much more, and they certainly covered themselves well.
Why did the show end?
Well, there were several reasons the show ended, and one of them was Chuck Connors. I mean, Chuck got to be so obnoxious, apparently, with the Procter & Gamble people who were the sponsors of the show. They'd asked him to do certain promotional things and to make some appearances, and Chuck was just belligerent and uncooperative, and you really shouldn't irritate a sponsor when the sponsor owns the time period, because they don't have to ask anybody. They can just cancel you. So they canceled the show and put on a show called Hey Landlord. And Hey Landlord didn't last but a few weeks, and it was a disaster. And their ratings weren't even half of what Branded was. So that was a big mistake. But that's what they did. And unfortunately, Chuck Connors was partially to blame for the show going off. Well, they decided they were going to more or less scrap the format and try and turn it into a traditional Western like The Rifleman, where he would live in the same town and have a supporting cast of players that would be in every episode along with him, and that they're going to more or less drop the whole coward and reputation stuff that came from the original format. And so, I mean, that had nothing to do with me. I thought that was a terrible idea.
Sure.
Because it was no idea. There was nothing. If they abandoned the basic format of the show, they were left with nothing.
Right.
Another Western. Just another show about a bunch of people living in a Western town. So it was a very bad idea. But, what could you do? I was no longer associated with the show at the time. I had no idea what they were doing until I saw it on the air. And, frankly, I wasn't watching the show every week anymore. I stopped watching the show after the second year. When I started seeing it, unless the guest stars were such that they perked my interest, I really didn't pay much attention to the show. I had other things to do. I had other scripts to write, and I was starting to make my own movies, and that was it. As long as I got my check every week, I was happy.
Had you continued on with the show, and had the show gone on for more years, how would you have ended this show? How do you see Jason McCord? How do you see his life continuing on? How do you see the ending to this guy who's always having to prove that he's not a coward? How do you see this show ending? How would have you wrapped up this show had you stayed on?
I would have had him die. I would have killed Chuck off, that son of a bitch. I would have killed him off. I would have had somebody trying to take his boots off. He falls on the ground, bangs his head, and dies of a brain hemorrhage. That's what I would have done.
I'm dying.
And they bury him with his boots on because they couldn't get his boots off, so they have to bury him with his boots on. And that's the end of the show, branded, and they say, branded, they buried him with his boots on. You know, another song comes in, and, you know, what can you say? I mean, how do any of these shows end? With every television series, it's always the same thing. How's it going to end when it ends? And the truth of the matter is when they resolve the format, it ruins the reruns. When they resolved the Fugitive, it ruined the reruns. Mm-hmm. Once they solved the thing and they got him cleared of the crime, and it turned out the one-armed man didn't do it, but the next-door neighbor did it, that disappointed everybody because they'd been thinking the one-armed man was the villain for 4 years or 5 years, and then they changed it. So the audience didn't like the ending, and the reruns suffered because of it. So it's better not to end these things. I mean, it's better for these series to go on and on and on into eternity. Once you resolve it, I think you end up doing damage to it.
You know, I'm only 23, so I'm seeing this show new for the first time. I'm not someone who grew up watching this show and is having, you know, an attack of nostalgia and is going back. You know, I'm seeing this for the first time. So it's a massive letdown when we start to see the show change, because then it's not branded anymore. It shouldn't even be called branded if that was the direction they were going to go.
I hardly agree with you. I thought they screwed it up by trying to change the formula and not coming up with another formula to replace it. Yeah. You had to have some kind of a hook for the series. It has to have a storyline, to make it that makes it different from all the other westerns. And just having him living in a town with a girlfriend and an adopted kid is not a format. It was nothing. So I mean, I don't know why they decided to just abandon the coward format, but that's the way it was. Yeah. Now, in addition to that, there's another thing. You know, I was very friendly with the film director Sam Fuller, and you know, Samuel Fuller directed a lot of movies, and I actually met him because I ended up buying a house here in Beverly Hills. I bought it from Clint Walker, who was another cowboy actor who played Cheyenne, and I bought a house from him. And it turned out the house had formerly been owned by Sam Fuller. So I got to be very friendly with Sam. I invited him up to see the house. He had a new wife, and he hadn't been to the house for years, and so we got to be great pals, and we hung out together and all that stuff. But I told him, I said, you know, I really stole something from you. You did a movie called I Shot Jesse James with John Ireland, and it was about Bob Ford, who killed Jesse James. And there was a song in the movie about Bob Ford, the dirty little coward that shot Mr. Howard and laid poor Jesse in his grave. And I said I took that idea of the song and made a branded song out of it for my TV series, Branded. And that's the truth. The branded song was really influenced by the song in the movie I Shot Jesse James by Sam Fuller. So I have to give him credit for that.
Do you still live in that same house?
I'm still here.
And you bought this from Clint Walker?
Yes, sir. I got to tell you that I've seen a lot of those Cheyenne episodes now. They've been repeating them on cable television, and they're quite good, actually. And he was very good. Clint Walker was very good. You know, he was this big guy. I mean, you know, I mean, he left a pair of boots here in the house when he vacated. I could have used them as planters for flowers in there. They were big. They were as big as planters would have been. I mean, he had what enormous feet he had. He was an enormous man. As a matter of fact, he was in a skiing accident where a ski pole accidentally pierced his chest and pierced his heart. And he survived. He lived through it, and he's still alive today. pretty good actor too. I must say, from the Cheyenne television shows that I've seen, his own. He's very good, and he deserved a bigger movie career. You know, it's odd that of all the Western, Eastwood is the one who became the most enduring motion picture star of all the Western actors that were on television. But Clint Walker, he should have come close. He should have done a lot more. If Sergio Leone had gotten hold of him, everything would have been different.
I'm seeing a common theme here. What's with you and big guys in boots? What's that all about?
Well, I didn't have much to do with Clint Walker.
Yeah, but he left his boots behind.
Yeah, he vacated the house. He left a pair of boots here, but that's about it.
Yeah, it's weird.
That's it. I should have kept them. I don't know what to do with them. I threw them out, but I should have kept them.
Do you have anything from the show branded?
I got a couple of title cards that they made from the original title cards that appear in the picture. It was done by the artist and everything. I have those.
Oh.
That's it.
Oh. Thought you had that broken saber that he made into a long knife.
No, that was used in the show. That they kept.
Oh. It's too bad.
Too bad. But I'm sure there were a bunch of broken sabers for the episode. I mean, they couldn't just have one.
Yeah.
The original producer of the show was a guy named Cecil Barker. And Cecil Barker, his whole experience in producing was in producing the Red Skelton television show. Now, he had nothing to do with dramatic television or westerns or anything else. He didn't know what the hell he was doing, so he was virtually worthless. And he drank, too, so the poor guy, I mean, you know, he had gone through hell. Anybody that worked for Red Skelton went through hell because Red Skelton was a really crazy guy. And he put his producers through nightmarish experiences trying to get the show on the air every week. He had to put up with an awful lot and take an awful lot of abuse. And most of these wonderful comedians were just terribly abusive to the staff that they work with. And they weren't much fun to be around at all. So poor Cecil Barker, he was used to getting abused by Red Skelton, and he started getting abused by Chuck Connors. So he just absorbed a lot of abuse. May he rest in peace.
Do you have any ownership over Branded still?
Yeah, we have some ownership, yeah. Once in a while we get some money.
H&I, the Heroes and Icons network, they're playing reruns of the show. Are you getting a cut of the pie?
I don't even know what that is. What's H&I?
Heroes and Icons network. They're playing
Where would I
episodes.
find that network?
What cable provider do you have?
I have Time Warner.
I'm not sure if it's on there. I have AT&T Uverse, and we just got it when the new year happened. So I don't know if it's not. It just launched in November of last year, so it's a pretty new channel, and they play all kinds of westerns. They play Cheyenne, Wagon Train, Have Gun Will Travel, Branded, all these shows. It's a brand new channel.
There is one station here that plays Gunsmoke and Cheyenne and Have Gun Will Travel. Yeah, but I don't. What did you say the name of this channel was?
Heroes and Icons, H&I for short.
All right. Let me write this down. H&I channel, huh?
Yep.
Okay. Heroes and Icons, huh?
Yeah. Well, my next question was going to be, are you getting a cut of that? But you didn't know it was on there. So.
I didn't even know it was on. So.
Have your attorney call them.
Yeah. Well, you're supposed to get something based on the Writers Guild, and they're supposed to collect the money for you.
Okay.
So I can always inquire on that.
Okay. Yep.
But these cable royalties are very small.
Over the last 50 years since this show went off the air, has anyone ever approached you about bringing it back, whether it's going to be brought back into a TV series, a made-for-TV movie, a feature-length motion picture? Has anyone ever came to you and said, hey, let's do something with this? Because right now, that's the thing right now in Hollywood. That's the real big trend that's going around now, is making an old TV show, either bringing it back and having a new version of it, or bringing it from TV to the movies or vice versa. Whether it's an old movie, they just use the concept and make it into a TV show, or they use the concept from a TV show and make it into a movie. So I've got to assume that somebody, maybe not anytime recently, but has anyone approached you about doing something with Branded?
People have asked me occasionally if I have the rights to make a movie out of it, and but never. There's never been any kind of an offer. It was the firm offer that would be worth putting the lawyers on it and getting spending money trying to work the contract out, because there are very few westerns that are ever made anymore. Almost none on television, as I mentioned, and very, very few in theaters.
Right.
And even when Quentin Tarantino made his movie this past year, he claimed it wasn't a western. He claimed that most of it took place in a cabin. That
right.
It wasn't really a western.
Right.
But of course, it was a western. But whatever you want to call it. But but aside from that one, it'd be hard pressed to find a western. Maybe The Revenant would be considered a western. When
was the last time you sat down and watched an episode of Branded?
Oh, not long ago. I have a package of all the episodes, and I recently ran 4 or 5 of them. I was particularly I was surprised to recall who the guest stars were in some of the episodes, that they were old-time movie stars, and I enjoyed seeing them. I just wish that the episodes had been better.
What's your favorite episode?
Oh, I don't know. Towards the beginning, I liked. There was one where they went to a way station, and they were in the desert, and a bunch of people, including Chuck Connors, and there was a well there, but they weren't sure if the well had been poisoned or not, and nobody wanted to drink from the well because they were afraid it was poisoned. And then the whole story revolved around that, whether someone's going to get Chuck Connors to drink the water, because after all he was expendable, because after all his life was over. He was a disgraced human being. He was a coward. So if somebody was going to be the guinea pig, why shouldn't it be him? And I thought that was a clever setup. It could have been made into a much longer piece, maybe even a feature.
Did you write that episode?
Yeah.
Larry, last question. When you think about this show, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Is it the process of how it came to be? Is it individual episodes? Is it Chuck Connors? Is it someone else? When you think of this show, Branded, what's the first thing that pops into your mind?
Well, what pops in my mind is it launched me into television as a series creator. That I was able to go from being a writer on television to being a creator of television shows myself. And actually, I guess I created 8 television series that got on the air. So over the years, there was 8 of them, and I almost never did a pilot that didn't get on the air. So we came close with one show called Sheriff Who, that was a wonderful show. John Aston played Evil Roy Slade. It was a show we did with Belson and Marshall, the comedy team, and it was scheduled to be on NBC. And then at the last minute, they pulled the show and put Jerry Lewis on, who said he wanted to do an hour variety show, which was, of course, canceled after only 6 episodes. It was a disaster. But we were on the air, and then they canceled the show. And then later on, it was done again at Universal as a 2-hour comedy movie, Evil Roy Slade, with John Aston. Mm-hmm. That was probably the only show I had that they went to pilot that didn't get on the air. Well, yeah, everything else always got on. So I had a pretty good track record.
Larry, thank you for taking the time to talk. I really appreciate it.
I'm glad you called, and now I'm going to go and have lunch. All right, bye-bye.
Branded, friends are a thing unknown. What do you do when you're branded? When you go on alone? Of his General Reed and the men who died. way to die.